My name is Dave Whitman. I'm the immediate past president on the Mortarboard Council, and it's my pleasure today to host this next rotation in chapter operations. To begin with, I want to lay out a couple of Zoom rules. That is that the Mortarboard National Leadership Conference is a place to exchange meaningful ideas. We will respect each other's opinions and allow all to share their ideas freely. We encourage participation from all members. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please raise your virtual hand. You can do that by going to the three dots that are next to your picture to be called on, or just type your questions in the chat. Jane Hamlin, our CEO Emeritus, is our chat minder for this session, and she'll be watching your questions and answering them or finding answers in the unlikely event that she doesn't have the answer. With that, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker for this session, Mr. Craig Evers. Craig was initiated in the Ohio State chapter, where he was the chapter president. Craig currently serves as vice president of the OSU Mortarboard Alumni Council and treasurer of the Mortarboard National Foundation. An expert in finance and budgeting, Craig is an economist for Brevin Howard and an international hedge fund management group. Please welcome Craig Evers. Craig, you're on.
Hi, welcome all. Let me throw up the slides first, lest I forget that. Everybody see it? A thumbs up from anybody? We're good? We're good. All right. Hello, welcome to Planning Chapter Finances. I'm Craig Evers. I will be your talking head for this session. Because on the Myers-Briggs scale, I'm on the far end of introverted. I would like a little easing into this whole social interaction thing, even if it's in these Zoom rectangles. Could I ask everyone to unmute yourselves? And on the count of three, I want you to say, hey, Craig, nice hair. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Hey, Craig, nice hair.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I've been growing it out for 1.5 years now. Got a last haircut in February of 2020 and just never got around to getting it cut again. I should probably update my headshot. Okay, you can mute yourselves again. I appreciate that. Let's talk about budgets. So let me go to the next slide. Let me make sure I can actually operate the slides. There we go. Who is this? If you haven't yet, type into the chat your name, your chapter's name and school, and your office or intended office if you haven't had elections just yet. These are my details. I live in Powell, Ohio, just north of Columbus, with my wife, who is obsessed with baking cakes and tie-dyeing clothes. I have 3 kids who are excited and nervous about going back to school in a couple of weeks, and a dog of well-diversified lineage who likes to chew on piano legs and wooden train tracks, as seen here. I am a trustee on and treasurer of the Mortarboard National Foundation. I am vice president for the Ohio State Mortarboard Alumni Council. I'm an economist for a macro hedge fund called Brevin Howard. I previously worked at the Federal Reserve Board in DC, where one of my more notable experiences was having then Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan give me a death stare during a meeting with Egypt's finance minister and central bank governor. I hope and trust this gathering goes better than that one. Dr. Martin Luther King is among the figures given attribution for the quote, "A budget is a moral document," with the basic idea being that how you allocate money is a natural reflection of your priorities, whether as an individual, as a nation, or as a Mortarboard chapter. When crafted, reviewed, and revised with careful thought, a chapter budget can be the framework for your success, allowing you to express shared priorities, serving as a roadmap to get from here to there, and to give your successors an early boost to help them achieve their priorities. Specifically, I want you to log off from the session understanding that your first step is to assess chapter finances, no matter your chapter office. Plans for chapter activities link directly to the budget and vice versa. A budget is a plan that is essential to the effectiveness of your entire chapter year. budgeting skills are transferable to other aspects of your lives. Every chapter should leave sufficient money for the next chapter. And there is a tool called a chapter endowment that is attainable for many chapters. So we'll start with item 1. Indira Gandhi, former Prime Minister of India, said, have a bias toward action. Break that big plan into small steps and take the first step right away. Certainly, taking responsibility for a chapter budget can seem daunting, but we can make it easier by breaking it down to smaller, easier steps. In the chat, I'm going to ask for suggestions on what are the first steps you can take to get a complete picture of your chapter's finances. I'll repeat the question. What are the first steps you can take to get a complete picture of your chapter's finances? Jane, do we have a shy group, or are we seeing some suggestions? Oh, you're on mute, Jane.
I think we have a little bit. I followed your orders and then didn't unmute. They're coming in.
Okay.
We have get a budget sheet, bank statements, 2 votes for bank statements. Look at last year's budget and what was accounted for, and another vote for the past budget. The current bank statement, that's 3 for bank statement.
No, this is good. This is good.
Ask
this is
the last treasurer.
yes.
Oh, 4 for previous budgets.
Maybe they watched this presentation by me last year. We will continue to tease this out a little bit. The evergreen answer is to always ask questions. Don't pretend to have answers when you don't, especially with money. More specifically, your first steps will likely going to include many of the things you mentioned. Talking with your advisor, talking with the previous treasurer or other relevant officers, gaining access to the chapter's financial records and checking savings accounts, cross-checking the treasurer's report in the national office, or perhaps cross-checking the treasurer's report in your school's business office for student organizations. Now, hopefully you've had or will soon have a smooth handoff where the advisor and the outgoing treasurer are readily available for chats, and the transition is a well understood process. In talking with your advisor and or the previous treasurer, you should learn about and gain access to those financial accounts, usually a checking account, maybe there's a savings account or something else. Get answers to these questions like, how much do we have? What limitations do the accounts have? Are there outstanding debts that we need to pay, et cetera, et cetera. If it's a bumpier transition, then the ability to access the treasurer's report in the national office and or the student organization office becomes more important and more relevant. Either way, part of your work in Mortarboard should be to ensure a smooth financial handoff to the next class, regardless of how things were handed to you. But getting the complete picture is more than knowing how much is in the checking account. What else should you learn? So this is where we complement the quantitative in the checking account with the qualitative hard-won wisdom of experience. What projects were regarded as successes financially or in terms of chapter visibility, and what projects weren't? Which projects were not worth the investment in terms of money, effort, and time? What projects did Mortarboard do in years past that your chapter hasn't done recently that you might go back to? It applies here. It applies in any other organization in college or afterward. Whenever you take over a new job, always review the previous records. Get yourself up to speed, become well-versed in the facts, however gruesome they are, and learn from the positive and negative experiences of your predecessors. Now, over the course of assessing the complete picture, you need to be able to answer 2 basic but crucial questions. What does your chapter need funds for, and how does your chapter raise funds? So we'll start with the expenditures side. Some common answers: chapter conference fee, conference travel, initiation expenses, chapter expenses, perhaps some scholarships or awards your chapter gives each year. Chapter meeting costs, we all need snacks and drinks. Any events your chapter might conduct, like a special leadership conference or a lecture. The other side of that equation is, how do we acquire funds to match those expenditures? Briefly, some broad categories. Some chapters have had long-running fundraisers like flower sales and calendar sales. Some of these were affected by COVID-19, but many chapters were still able to execute and provide near normal levels of revenue. Local dues. We encourage your chapters to assess local dues to give your chapter a good start and incentivize involvement, skin in the game, you might say. You might work with alumni on a fundraiser each year. There might be an annual gift from your local alumni chapter or group or council, and a chapter endowment, which is something we'll talk about a bit more later. Moving on to item 2. The great 20th century philosopher, Yogi Berra, warned us that if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. So we've just started thinking in broad terms about your chapter's expenses and revenues. So with Professor Berra's words in mind, let's spend some time thinking about where we want to go as mortarboard chapters and make a plan. The budget. Here is an illustrative example of a chapter's planning report, maybe a chapter action plan, or CAP, as you might know it. This hypothetical chapter has 5 items that they've mapped out. 1, a weekly study group with potluck snacks. 2, a Scholar of the Month award with a small gift. 3, a TED Talk series over 3 weeks with invited faculty. 4, a mortarboard branded pencils giveaway during finals week in December. And 5, a campus-wide symposium awards dinner to recognize outstanding seniors. You'll see they have targeted dates and costs and funding sources. So I ask you rhetorically, what's wrong with this picture? Well, briefly, you can see the snacks and scholarships in the first row is fine. Potluck snacks and a free on-campus study room means no costs and no funding needed. The mortarboard pencils project in the 4th row will require funds to purchase the pencils to give away, but funding is said to be tied to the chapter budget, so that's fine for now. However, the small gift for Scholar of the Month in the 2nd row, that costs money and there is no funding tied to it. Similarly, the last lecture events in the 3rd row might require room and or equipment rental expenses, perhaps some refreshments, always important. And again, there are no funding sources listed. Finally, the Student Scholar Symposium Awards dinner in the bottom row has no costs listed, which seems really unlikely, and there is no funding sources tied to it. This is where it's important to look critically at your plans and to plan ahead, because that Student Scholar Symposium Awards dinner won't turn out the way you envisioned it if you haven't planned the funding for it. Now, let's stay with this hypothetical chapter, but turn to a hypothetical simplified form of a budget. This draft budget shows $2,500 in revenues with a nice mix of local dues and several fundraisers. Expenses are listed as $1,355, mostly conference related, for a chapter net profit of over $1,100. I'll ask in the chat, or if anyone wants to speak out loud, what's wrong? What's missing here?
Grace writes dates, question mark.
Wait, those numbers don't add up, do they? Oh yeah, they do, never mind.
That was good of you to check. They do add up, but that is actually an excellent point. Thank you.
And Noah says an overall total, excuse me for interrupting you.
Go ahead.
Noah writes an overall total, subtract expenses and revenue.
The revenues less expenses line of 1145 is something we're gonna, I'll coax us along a little bit here. Remember that 5-item chapter action plan included things that need funding. So listed here, where are the costs for the fundraising? Where are the expenses for the Scholar of the Month gift, the last lecture series, the Student Scholar Symposium dinner? And is $5 allocated as an expense an appropriate amount for the Pencils project? There's plenty missing from this. So does this chapter really have a net revenue of $1,145? Really, no. The chapter hasn't fully mapped out how it plans to get where it wants to be, so it's going to end up someplace else. With some more careful mapping, this chapter can manage a balanced budget and has a path toward its goals. You'll see here in the highlighted yellow that fundraising expenses combined to $400 looks reasonable given the revenue. You got Scholar of the Month gift highlighted there, $50. Last lecture series expenses of $150. Mortarboard Pencils project to $150, and the awards dinner with a $400. You've got $2,500 in, $2,500 out, net zero. Now, moving on to item 3. Build in what we've just covered. A chapter budget isn't just writing down some ideas. It's making sure all activities are tied to actual costs. To quote the French author and aviator Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, a goal without a plan is just a wish. It applies here and it applies in any other organization in college or afterward. If you can tie your organization's operations to the money available or the money that needs to be earned, you will recognize problems in advance and come out ahead. Now, the hiccups for most institutions and organizations are not a lack of ideas on the spending side. Rather, it's on the revenue side. When you discuss fundraising with your Mortarboard chapter members, I encourage you to think of fundraising ideas through the lens of serving campus, not just as moneymakers in and of themselves. That entrepreneurial mindset of identifying problems or needs or gaps, looking to provide solutions for some financial gain, that should help get some creative juices flowing and widen the options available to you. Now, many chapters were caught in the spring of 2020 without having done their fundraising projects. So they had little or even no money to finish the year, and they handed off the chapter to their successors without suitable funding, and in some cases, zero funding. A general rule of thumb is to make your money first and pay yourself first, i.e. pay the chapter first. Although mortarboards are often members for a single year, financial planning shouldn't be. And the effectiveness of your chapter depends heavily on a financial plan that stretches beyond one academic year. Now, this gives me a chance to bring up a favorite phrase of mine, memento mori. That's Latin for remember that you will die. This phrase, associated with the philosophy of the ancient Stoics, and more recently, some folks on YouTube hawking shirts and coins, might feel a tad heavy during the 4th chapter operations session of the day, but stick with me for a moment. Predominantly, you are, I'm assuming here, predominantly early 20-somethings, and you might start to feel like time is moving faster. As an early 40-something, let me confirm for you that that is in fact the case. Your year in the active chapter of Mortarboard will go quickly. It is finite and irreplaceable. So let me say, remember that your year will end, and I strongly encourage you to plan backwards from that endpoint to make explicit what you want to achieve as a chapter and to delineate how you're going to achieve it. So, hard pivot. What are some viable fundraising ideas that your chapter can plan for the upcoming school year that also serve the campus community while also managing to thread that needle of safety requirements during an uncertain future with COVID? Now, if you have ideas or experiences to share, please do so in the chat. And I think, Jane, you had a session on fundraising earlier today. So I would invite you to share some of your bullet point takeaways in a moment. In fact, let me tick through what I have, and then Jane, I'll ask you to summarize the chat and your takeaways from your session, because that would be wonderful. The Headshot Project for chapters with aspiring photographers, offering headshots for a small fee, perhaps with a scenic campus site as the background. You can talk up Mortarboard to those rising juniors. And e-commerce t-shirts, there are many of them out there. Charge enough to cover your shirt and make a profit. Think about what your purpose is. What's your message going to be? Blossom Express is Mortarboard's preferred flower vendor. We strongly encourage chapters to consider using this trusted, reliable vendor. And let me add, in preparing for this session, I reviewed over a dozen chapter budgets from the past couple of years. And one of the things I took away from that exercise is that chapters generated remarkable amounts from working with Blossom Express to sell flowers. So in all seriousness, please do look into it. There are the classic cookie, poster, sticker sales. Just please make sure you work with an approved vendor, or if you want to make use of the talents of the bakers in your chapter, snacks are always important. Cleaning the on-campus or near-campus concert or event venue. Now, obviously, this one depends on what types of events you have going on nearby, and importantly, on the course of COVID. I will offer one pre-COVID example. I was not there, but, because I was studying abroad at the time, but in the summer of 2001, friends from my mortarboard class still recall with amusement acting as security at an NSYNC concert at Columbus Crew Stadium, and then cleaning up for the fans afterwards. So they made money. They made money for the chapter and bonded as a group. No strings attached. That is a joke because that's the title of an NSYNC album, but this is probably not the right generation for that joke, and that's fine. Jane, can I ask you if any ideas have materialized in the chat and or your bullet points from your session?
Well, at least one of our members' friends is laughing at you in the chat because of your humor. You're making good points there. A couple of other ideas. I think the peer-to-peer type fundraisers typically are hard on chapters. They can bring a little revenue. The kinds of events that showcase the campus, like Park Like a Dean or President for a Day, are a good way to get high visibility, and that's a way to combine fundraising projects. I love your idea about the campus stadium cleanup because that's quick and easy money that you might need to get started, and as you build your long-term fundraising program. The other things related to headshots, like career services, are to provide resume reading, provide a shirt and tie for a person who might not be able to afford that for a professional headshot, or a nice dress or blouse. And that is certainly a nice mortarboard service, but there are a couple things that can combine service and a little fundraising. Kaplan is the other thing. To make money using the Kaplan test preparation service.
Oh, okay.
There are local Kaplan representatives that'll work with your chapter to put on how do you take the LSAT or the MCAT. You can charge money for that, fill the classroom, make the Kaplan rep do all the work, and they, of course, win, and so do you.
Very good.
I'll stop there.
I had not heard of that one. That's fantastic. Thank you, Jane. We'll move on to the next item and unfortunately leave NSYNC behind. In the Charles Dickens novel, David Copperfield, the character Wilkins Micawber delivers this piece of advice. Annual income, £20. Annual expenditure, 19, 19, and 6. Result, happiness. Annual income, £20. Annual expenditure, £20, ought, and 6. Result, misery. No, granted, Micawber is not the ideal role model for budgeting, but that particular principle is sound for mortarboard chapters, even coming from a fictional mid-19th century serial debtor. So how will good financial planning and the resulting outcomes for your chapter affect your own development as a leader? I want you to be brave. I want you to add your comments to the chat, so I'll repeat the question. How will good financial planning on your part and the resulting positive outcomes for your chapter affect your own development as a leader? I'll give you a little bit of time to tap away in that chat box. continue to give Jane a hard time during the session. Jane, is it crickets or are we seeing a few things?
Are you guys writing in the chat, or am I losing my eyesight? Please, somebody put, only Maya has been writing in there, and Marley.
This is a hard one. This is a hard one. This might not be fair of me in the fourth session of the day.
Oh, we got one. We got one.
There we go.
Logan Knutson from Carleton says it develops personal and group accountability, being able to follow through on commitments.
Very good. Very good.
By planning things out, says Maya, you demonstrate organization and show you care. I
Thank you
for the members.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you. I know it's a hard question. Thank you for being brave and putting that in. Let me try to advance the slide and take through a few items here. Financial planning for any organization in a time of pandemic and economic difficulty is a serious challenge that requires setting goals for yourself and for the chapter as a whole. Helping your chapter members understand the importance of clear and reasonable financial goals, along with laying out the means of achieving those goals, is something that leaders in Mortarboard do, and it is excellent training for leadership roles down the road. Finally, know your limitations. It is okay to ask for help, advice, and guidance. You may need to have an advisor to help specifically with financial planning. Moving on to the next item, former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall said, "None of us got where we are solely by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps." Your chapter is not a static entity. It changes year to year with each new class, and it can either grow or wither under your stewardship. As leaders, we need to be good stewards and leave the finances better for the next class. So in that vein, let's think for a moment about how your chapter's financial success can and will reflect on you. I've asked a lot of you. This is the last time I'm going to ask for you to add something to the chat. This is it. This is your last chance. Go for it. How will your chapter's financial success reflect on you?
A continuation of the chapter.
It's very important. It's very important.
Shows your ability to plan ahead, set up future mortarboards for success, demonstrating efficiency and organization, which means you were dedicated and responsible. There's the word responsible again from Katie Lynn at UCLA.
Thank you for that.
Successful chapter financial position is indicative of a well-planned year.
That's very true.
Tim at Nebraska Lincoln.
Thank you, Tim.
Everybody wants to hire the person who left their last organization in the green.
Who wrote that?
Oren Gachi from Texas Tech University, the treasurer.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. So broadly, if you benefited from a smoothly run transition and there are ample funds in your checking account, it's incumbent on you to pass those on to your successors. If your transition was rough and/or you see a paltry figure in the checking account, you have an opportunity this year to demonstrate leadership and to turn things around for the next class. Being able to list on your resume that you improved your chapter's budgeting process, that you increased fundraising by X%, or that you doubled participation by chapter members in fundraising activities, those are attention-grabbing details on resumes and excellent anecdotes in interviews.
Oh.
All right, moving on. As famed investor Warren Buffett once quipped, "Someone's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago."
Oh, very good.
My children know this all too well. Every time we go to visit my parents, I point out the giant pine tree in their front yard, one that I planted as a sapling over 30 years ago and now reaches 40 feet into the sky, which is nearly as high as the eye roll on my now tween daughter. As we near the end of this session, I want to cover my last objective, and that's to let you know about chapter endowments. In basic terms, an endowment is a fixed chunk of money referred to as principal. And the beneficiary of the endowment receives regular payouts from the financial gains. That includes capital appreciation, dividends, and interest income generated off of that chunk of money, and over time, the previous earnings from that chunk of money that haven't been distributed as payouts. I think Einstein referred to compound interest as one of the most powerful forces in the universe. There are already 10 mortarboard chapters with full endowments, if I counted correctly, and they're guaranteed about $350 a year as a distribution each and every year, with that figure growing slowly over time. And 6 more chapters are currently working toward their own endowments. Now, creating an endowment requires a good bit of leadership, teamwork, and effort, but it is an attainable goal for many chapters and a guaranteed source of revenue for your chapter in perpetuity. If you are interested in learning more, the national office will be happy to discuss that with you. And I'll briefly share with you that as president of my Ohio State class back in 2001 and 02, I wanted to start an endowment fund for our chapter. This was in the immediate aftermath of the September 2001 terrorist attacks. The economy was in recession, and while our chapter was strong and active, I failed at generating enough interest from the chapter to build an endowment from the ground up. Fast forward to the late 2010s, and as a member of the local alumni group, I was happy to hear that National Mortarboard had started assisting chapters in creating endowments, and that Ohio State's chapter was seeking donations to build the principal, that initial chunk of money. I was very happy to donate to that, and even happier in the fall of 2019 to present the Ohio State chapter with a check representing their very first distribution off of that endowment. So you can get an idea of my height versus Jane's via that picture. The Ohio State's chapter's finances are stronger now than they were several years ago because mortarboard members had the foresight and leadership to build that endowment, and I encourage you to consider doing the same. Now, as I close my prepared remarks and slides, I want to quickly review what I hope you take away from this presentation. First, assess chapter finances, no matter your assigned office. Ask questions, talk to your advisor, understand the complete picture, and know how much money you're starting with. Plans for chapter activities link directly to the budget and vice versa. A budget is a plan that is essential to the effectiveness of the entire chapter year. And memento mori, remember that you too will die. Your year will go fast, so plan well. Skills in budgeting are transferable to other aspects of your lives. Every chapter should leave sufficient money for the next chapter. And there is a tool called a chapter endowment that is attainable for many chapters. Charles Evans, who is the president of the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank, mentioned in a speech last summer that the uncertainties around the outlook for the economy at that time were, quote, enormous, and the Fed's forecasts would, quote, undoubtedly be wrong. Hint, they were. But Evans, nevertheless, argued that it's crucial to think and plan ahead. He recalled years ago that meetings to formulate economic forecasts at the Chicago Fed would be kicked off with a quote from Dwight D. Eisenhower, who, among other things, planned and supervised the Normandy landing in World War II. The quote, "In preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." Your estimates on spending and revenues won't be precisely correct, but the process of creating a chapter budget is an indispensable exercise for your success as a chapter and a skill that will serve you well in the years ahead. Here's where I ask you if I've forgotten anything. Any questions? I'm also curious how long I went. How much time do we have left?
We
10
have
minutes?
9 minutes.
9 minutes. Okay.
Why did Mr. Greenspan give you the death stare, Craig?
Excellent question. Very briefly, my job at the time was to make sure that I prepared him with a briefing book that let him know about the political, social, and economic developments in Egypt for that meeting. And I failed to include one crucial bit of information, that it was illegal at the time for businesses to fail. So during the course of conversation, Greenspan and the central bank governor and the finance minister had a conversation, and they informed Greenspan that that was a law. And then that's when Greenspan turned around and gave me that look. And I had read that, and I knew that, and I should have included it in the briefing book, but didn't. So that's why.
And Craig, Bianca from the University of Washington asks if your slides will be available to her and all of the participants.
Of course, of course. I don't know what's the easiest way to distribute that. I know in years past, we've actually put recordings of the presentations on the website, but if you, yeah, I can email them to you directly if that's what you prefer, or you tell me what's the easiest way.
Jane, can't he send them to Mortarboard and they go on Whova? Or
Yeah,
he can upload them?
We'll upload them to Whova, and unless they've changed drastically from when you gave them to us, Craig.
These are the same slides I sent to Brooke and to you a few days ago.
Okay, super. Well, we'll just put them on Whova. If you can't find them there, oh, good. Let me know, or anyone in the office.
All right.
So, Craig, I have a question about how you explain simply what an endowment is.
That question implies that I failed in doing so during the presentation.
No, it means that I don't know how to do it.
It's you know, it's not all of financial planning and personal finance is an underemphasized area of education at the middle school, high school, college level. There are way too many adults who don't have just the basics of personal finance. And that's why I was so happy to see that the Mortarboard, in partnership with our financial advisors, Charles Schwab, had an event a few weeks ago where Charles Schwab did a presentation on Financial Planning 101, and I believe they'll continue to do those. But this is an area that you might guess that because I ended up at the Federal Reserve that I was passionate about reading about personal finance instead of going out and hanging out with people growing up, and you'd be right. But an endowment is really just a chance for you to build that chunk of money, and instead of worrying about raising money year after year after year, if you can do that work and build that chunk of money, you can create an income flow off of that chunk of money. And then you can do more things if you can really exert that leadership and work that development muscles in your group to build that initial chunk of money. And the chapters who have done that have not done that in 1 year, by and large. They've taken multiple years. So don't think that you have to show up in Columbus with a bag of money with a $sign written on it. You don't have to do that. But if you can establish a multi-year plan and have gotten a quarter of the way there and hand that to the next chapter and give them the charge of like, look, get the next quarter of the way done, and in like 4 years we'll be able to make this an accomplishment that will outlive all of us. That is an enormous accomplishment for you as a burgeoning leader.
Craig, this is Dave. If I may add to that conversation, of course these endowments can be of any size, but I believe the minimum to be fully funded is $10,000.
That is correct.
So someone had asked that. So as Craig said, and Jane referred to, this is where you want to utilize your alumni. You can make up this endowment with $25 donations all the way, up to someone who wants to be a considerable donator. We've had some chapter endowments created by a single or a few people. It's a full gamut. You just need to make that decision that this is something you're going to do. As Craig said, don't think you have to do it between September and May of any given academic year, but get started and start to collect those funds, put them away, in a savings account that you're not attacking for operational purposes, and let them build over a few years, and then come to Mortarboard with that funding ready to go. So yeah, it's a wonderful way to generate $350, $500 a year that you don't have to worry about going out and selling flowers for, or doing raffles, or those sorts of things that we do on a normal basis.
None of this is easy. All of this requires work. All of this requires vision and leadership, but it's just how much do you want to emphasize the immediate term versus the intermediate term or the long term? And that's up to you to decide as leaders of your chapter.
We only have a couple more minutes for this session. If there are any last minute burning questions for Craig?
And Dave, if I may, while they're thinking, this is Jane, I've been asked by the tellers to ask the delegates who are in this session to check your email for information about the election for student rep and next steps. So delegates, please check your email.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Craig. Planning and managing chapter finances is not only important for the upcoming year, but lays the groundwork for future chapter success. We are appreciative of your insights and your advice.
Thank you all. I'm sorry. All right, let me say thank you all for attending.
ahead.
You guys were great with the chat, and I appreciate your coming to my session. There are lots of sessions to attend. Thank you.